Hello everyone, welcome to our channel PyWizard. This is Sambit. Today we will cover the third video in the series of the 500 videos that we aim to make to completely cover Python, which is an object-oriented language, programming language that is used for various fields today. We will cover the concepts of variables, rules for variables name, and touch upon the concepts upon various basic functions like print, input, a length function, string function, integer function, and float functions. So yeah, let's get started. Uh, what is a variable? A variable is a container. You can say it is a container that is used to store values. It's introduced and initialized the first time a value is stored in it. A variable's value is overwritten when it is assigned another value. Please remember this. Let's look at a few examples. Here you see RAM is a variable and I have used it as a container to store the value 60. So when I when I enter RAM again and press shift enter, I get the value 60 because 60 is the value that is stored inside RAM. But there is another concept that I just mentioned, that a variable's name gets overridden when it is assigned another value. For example, here in the next cell, we have now assigned the value 80 to RAM, and we are using it here in this expression, Sham is equal to Ram plus 20. So ideally, because by our concept, the value of Ram should get overridden to 80, so the value of Sham should be 100, right? And that is what exactly happens when I press Sham and I press shift enter, then I get 100. Also from this, please note that once a value is assigned to a variable, it can be used in expressions with other values. Now let's move on to what are the various rules that are associated with naming a variable. It can be always one word. It can start with a letter or the character underscore. The reserved keywords in Python cannot be used as a variable. We can access the keywords using this link, or I'll just right away tell you in a programmatic manner. Understand the list of keywords defined for your version of Python. Now, keyword is a module that is provided by Python to work with keywords or search keywords in a programmatic manner. Here you can use the function import keyword and print keyword.kw list, which would basically allow you to print which would basically result in Python printing all the keywords for you. Please remember that these cannot be used as variable names. So also remember that variables are case sensitive. For example, Sanket written in all large caps would be different from a Sanket which has only the first letter as the large cap, and different from a Sanket which has maybe a few letters with large caps. They're all considered to be different. And also remember that only numbers, letters, or underscore characters can be used in variable names. So these are the basic rules that we need to follow to ensure that we are able to define variables that actually are able to store values for us in Python. Now let us look at 6 basic functions. I would first tell you the concepts with regards to these functions, and we would apply all of these functions in a program later as an example. Okay. What is a print function? Any argument that is passed on to a print function, it would basically get printed as the name suggests. Okay. Print function displays the string values inside the parentheses as an output. Please remember that always the print function needs to be given a string value as an input. Only it will take string value as an input, nothing else. Okay. And the quotes that are the single quotes only mark the beginning and the end of the string. They do not get printed. They also justify the fact that they justify it to Python that whatever argument is being passed, we only need to print the string version of that argument. Okay. Now next we move on to input function. It's used to take the input from the user And also remember that any value entered is converted to a string by the input function. You may enter an integer value, it gets converted into its string form. You may enter a floating point value, it gets converted into its string version. Okay. Then we come on to the len function or the length function. As the name suggests, the length function gives us a number which is the length of the characters in a string, and hence always remember that a string value can be only passed as an argument into the length function. Next we move on to string, integer and float functions. String function, as the name suggests, converts integer and floating point data types into string. For example, if I had string of 0, then it will convert it into 0 with single quotes, which is the string version. Same for a floating point value, which is 4.13, it converts it into this string version. The integer function converts string and floating point data types into integers. For example, let's say you have integer of -99, it will convert it into 99. You have integer of 2.31, it will convert to 2. If you remember correctly, the difference between integer and float function is that integer version always removes the decimal points or the digits after the decimal points. That is what it does here in case of 2.31 as well, right? Now next, what is the float function? It converts integer and string data types into floating point. Float of -3.72 will be -3.72. Float of 10 would be 10.0. That is basically adding decimals or ensuring that a string gets converted into a version that has decimals. Now, one thing that you all need to note is that whenever we call for a function, it needs to have parentheses, and that is why in all of the basic functions that we have discussed, there is a parenthesis after the name of the function, which indicates to Python that it's a function itself. Now I have written down an entire function which will basically cover all the concepts that we have read through this video. Okay, now let's go through it line by line. First of all, it says print parenthesis single quotes what is your name. Okay, as we have already mentioned, print would always take string as an input. So since we have put quotes, so this is basically a string now. So what is your name? Okay, and you will see later when the output comes, as you can see here is the output where it prints what is your name. It just prints what is your name. It just does not print the single quotes. I have mentioned in the video already that quotes do not get printed as they just justify the beginning and end of the string. I mean, they indicate the beginning and the end of the string. They are not part of what needs to get printed. Okay, now we have my name, which is a variable which stores our input using the input function in the form of a string. Okay, as I have mentioned, whatever input you provide, whatever input is passed on to the input function, it will always be converted into a string, correct? Now in the next line, what it says, print, it is good to meet you, which is within single quotes and hence a string. Now the question arises that we have something that is outside single quotes, right? So it might not be a string, but as I said, we have my name, which has the input function. So anything you enter here would anyways be converted to string. So it is good to meet you plus my name basically takes us back to the concept of string concatenation that we probably read a couple of videos back. And hence the Python basically does not throw up any error because all the arguments entered are in the form of strings and string concatenation takes place. Next is print the length of your name is, and again everything is inside single quote, so it's a string. Next is print length of my name. Okay, again my name is a string because whatever would be provided as an input goes through the input function, gets converted into a string. So my name is a string, and as we already know, len function only takes string value, only uh, provides us the number of characters in a string. So length of my name also would not throw up any error. Next we go to print, if you don't mind, what is your age, which is again within single quote, so it is fine. Again, we have another input, which is my age. Okay, then we do another kind of string concatenation, which is, oh great, you will hit, which is a string by itself, plus string of int of my age plus 1. Okay, which is everything inside brackets. Int of my age will obviously give you the integer value. Then you do plus 1, again you get an integer value, but since you have used a string function, this entire thing becomes a string, not throwing up an error. Then you have another string. So basically what you're again doing is that you are concatenating three string values here. So let's see what happens. So once you enter, it will ask you what is your name. You can write anything. I have written Ram. It then prints, it is good to meet you, Ram. As I said, it concatenates it. Okay. The length of your name is, then it asks, then it basically goes to len function. It takes Ram as the input and character, so it gives us an answer of 3. Then it prints, if you don't mind, what is your age? Then you give an input. I given the input as 49 or so, or I mean that is how I wanted it to be designed because of the sentence here. So then basically next line it prints, oh great, you will hit 50, which is 49 plus 1, and its string version, so it helps it concatenate. Oh great, you will hit 50 in a year, a half century. Okay. So in this single function, we have covered print function, we have covered length function, we have covered the concept of variable, we have covered input function. We also kind of recalled the concept of string concatenation here. So yeah, let's move on to the next concept. So let's next cover another rule in Python that is there, and that needs to be covered before actually we move on to the next concepts. As you can see here, we converted inside using the int function, we converted a string into an integer. We also converted uh, uh, floating point number into an integer. Okay. Now, if we actually enter int of 2.56, ideally this should give us 2, right? That is what everyone would believe. But according to the rules of Python, you cannot pass a float literal in for a int function. What is a float literal? A float literal is the string version of a floating point number. Okay. So if you try and do int of 2.56 or any floating point number with a and the string version of any floating point number, it will basically tell you that invalid literal for int with base 10, which basically means that you cannot pass on a floating point number string version onto the int function. Next is a quick tip before we actually conclude. If you try and actually make 63 is equal to 63, then it will always give you false. 63.0 is equal to string of 63, it will also give you false. But if you make 63.0 is equal to 63, it will print as true. Why? Because Python always differentiates between integer and string data types, and floating point and string data types as the difference between numbers and texts, basically considering string as text and floating point and integer and as numbers. And by the same logic, it considered floating point and integers and numbers, so it gives a value of true when it is 63.0 is equal to 63. Okay. Now next we will cover Boolean values, operators, comparison operators, and elements of flow control in the upcoming videos. Thank you. Have a great day.